kind of learn that there's an illusion out there, you kind of see that the guy that's really the best police officer is the guy that's kind of sitting in his car, kind of minding his own business, not really doing anything, kind of, if he can waste most of his day, fiddling around with the computer or something like that, you're actually, I'd be over there saying, thank you for your service. You're doing a hell of a job.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. And I guess the other side of that, particularly when I'm dealing with anarchists, that I usually have to explain to them is like, I totally get that I despise police brutality, no question. I expose it when I see it. I do talk about it on my radio shows. But I think they also tend to forget, by the way, they also do sometimes arrest, in fact, most of the time, arrest people who are actually committing crimes. It does happen. And you don't really want those people, raping your sister or your wife. And that's another thing, unfortunately, that affects these people psychologically. There was actually a episode of Cops Too Hot for TV, and at one point, because it was too hot for TV, they went into a house where a guy had gone crazy and pulled the "I'm going to shoot everybody in the family" thing. And, because, of course, they're not going to play that live, but they literally went through every room. Every one of the children was shot, including the little baby who could not have been more than 3 months old. So imagine you're a person and you walk into that, and you imagine the psychological impact. And there was a cop, I guess, who's been frequently on Cops who was there, and he says, you want to understand why cops sometimes have an attitude or shoot themselves or, you remember the other things, then just take a good look at what you just saw. Go back and watch it again a few times, and then you'll get some concept of what it's like to be a police officer. And I don't feel that means that I'm trying to glorify police officers. As I said previously, I'd like that we did things to society to just prevent crime in the first place through, positive solutions. If there's a drunk driving problem, design cars that, don't let people drive while drunk. If there's a problem with jaywalking here, then find a way to get people across the road without getting hurt. Design the infrastructure in a way that prevents the need for a lot of these ridiculous laws, and then the need for the state starts to go away. That's essentially what the whole zeitgeist movement solution would be, is that, you need to look at the root causes of crimes, figure out what they are, and then eliminate those causes at the source, as opposed to putting more cops out in the field who can only, at best, catch people hopefully in the act or show up later and punish them when they're only doing what's natural in a situation where perhaps the economy has dropped so much that they're stealing to feed their families or selling drugs to feed their families. Throwing those people in jail makes a lot of money. One of the benefits of me being a friend of Senator Mike Gravel is I read his book, and he coined the term prison industrial complex. That there's all kinds of money being made doing that, and they're calling for even more of, even more privatization of it and turning it into a for-profit corporate business, which terrifies the hell out of me. Whether I agree with everything Michael Moore says or not, his film Capitalism, A Love Story, when he exposed that privatized, juvenile facility where there was a judge on the take who was sending kids to that facility for years at a time for something as stupid as throwing a steak at your stepfather, one of the kids in question, you start to understand that, this system, they want to throw more of us in jail. That's what the whole war on drugs is about. Then, unfortunately, this is the part that we have to remember, is not to dehumanize the people who have been manipulated to believe that what they're doing is helping people, and to try to reach them. And that also, we talked a lot about the police. Now, let's talk a little bit more about soldiers. Now, you guys are both servicemen, former servicemen, and it's funny that you mentioned the communists, because one of the things that I said is that, before the terrorists, we had the communists, and before the communists, we had the Russians, I'm sorry, not the Russians, the Germans and the Nazis, and then, before them, it was this group or that group, or, remember when it was the red men, the evil savages of the West,
Yeah.
Always someone around to justify, government protection. And, usually they were always people that had something we wanted from them, So So, I mean, and I guess then my first question then obviously would be, obviously, your CO was looking out for the possibility of communist infiltrators. I'm sure that Muslims in the military probably don't do so well. And I guess my next question then would be to you guys, is just like, during the time that you were in the military, did you and your fellow soldiers ever talk about, government corruption or anything, along that line? Or, did you ever say to yourself, so what are we going to do if they ever order us to shoot protesters or something?
Well, for me, I think when I was in the military and I really started to see that things were messed up was when I was stationed at headquarters Marine Corps in Washington D.C. for about a year and a half, and while I was there, I did a lot of I did purchasing. I basically bought supplies and different things for my unit and for the Marine Corps and whatnot, and then we also did contracts. And as far as having conversations with one another, I do remember that we started to me and a couple of my friends at that time, we started to discuss how wasteful the budgetary process is in the military. And are we on?
Yeah, we're on.
Okay. I mean, that to me that was the biggest thing. I mean, did we ever get into a situation where we were saying, okay, what if we get orders to shoot protesters? I can't say that anything like that ever really became an issue. Now, I did actually do a security detail during Bush's inauguration when he was when they did that whole parade thing there. There was quite a few Bush protesters and whatnot out there, and we were sent out there to kind of keep an eye on that situation. But I mean, at no point in time were we given anything to be like really all that aggressive. And I remember actually kind of thinking, I agree with these people, I agree with them, but here I am standing on the line, to make sure that nobody does anything. All I could say is that, I mean, we in regard to our specific duties into what we were doing, the money that we were wasting, the strategy that we used, that was the extent of my experience that we were like, man, this is just ridiculous. There's just something completely wrong with this situation.
Yeah, I would say in regard to my time, I mean, I was in the Army in the late 80s, early 90s, and I was in Germany when the whole thing fell apart basically. And I think the thing that really stands out in my mind is when I was at the Paris Air Show, and I actually this was the first one that the Russians, or the Soviets, had their equipment at, and I actually got to walk up and look at some of the the Russians' finest technology. And when I got up there, one of them was their Havoc helicopter, and I walked up to this thing and I thought, oh my God, this thing is a piece of junk. I mean, It was just so poorly made, and the fact that it was at like the Paris Air Show, it was supposed to be like the best, the best that they had. I mean, I could just see how crappy it was, and to me, it was just like, these people, this isn't like it is, I mean, I could just, it just absolutely like the bubble popped as far as the Soviets being a threat. I was just, at that point I was done, and that was probably like 1988. I realized that, the Soviets weren't really, as bad as we had, cooked them up to be. Of course, nuclear weapons and everything, but
sure.
The fact that they were going to invade Western Europe or anything like that, I pretty much, was at ease at that point.
Oh, absolutely, and I think that it's funny that you point out, as you said, cooked up, made them look like they're worse than they are, is an example of that kind of propaganda. Because I remember the same thing at that same time period, I was kind of at least for a brief part of my life, an Air Force brat. My brother was an engineer. He made the flight simulator for the F-16. I mean, not alone, but he was on the team. And, and I went to air shows constantly, and I remember, the big darkness about, the MiG-28, and some of the other Russian things that were there, like the Russian Hind helicopter, I've heard is actually still a pretty formidable machine, but for what it does. But overall, we found out when the Iron Curtain came down that they were bluffing about a great deal of their, or at least they called it a bluff anyway. That's what was said in popular culture, about their nuclear capability was nowhere near what we thought. Their military capabilities in so many other ways was nowhere near what they thought. And I realized, why would they, the government tell us all this crap? But I'm like, oh, well, yeah, you need to make people afraid of someone so that they'll be willing to go to war against them. The whole point of the Cold War was we're waiting for the opportunity that we could, take against the Russians. And overall, though, it's pretty much. I watched a documentary recently by the guy who did Century of Self. He did one called The Power of Nightmares. I think the two of you should watch it if you haven't already, because it's freaking hilarious. Just how
in regard to like Al Qaeda
and Al Qaeda not really. I mean, it's like in Zeitgeist Addendum at one point he points out that that Peter Joseph says that that Al Qaeda as we understand it doesn't exist, and I didn't understand what he meant until I watched this movie. But basically that Al Qaeda was actually a very small group of men, that in fact like a lot of the footage that we've seen of them is propaganda footage. Like there's a shot of Osama bin Laden talking to like 12 guys in ski masks with AK-47s.
Right.
You research that, you find out that it was all hoax. Like he hired those people to follow him around.
Yeah.
And the guys in Afghanistan were, trying to find Al Qaeda, and they never seemed to. They were fighting the Taliban, because, well, they lived there. But, they were supposed to be fighting this Al Qaeda thing that doesn't seem to exist, And I think that, you made a very good point that people, they need that hero complex, because it's supposed to be the benefit that they're fed during their, military conditioning to tell them, well, hey, you're going to do this. You're going to fight for mom and apple pie, and it's going to be awesome. And there's these really big bad guys over there, and you need to go get them. And these people tell themselves that stuff to make them feel more secure, when they're getting shot at. And it takes some time generally for the shine of that polish to kind of get dull and the truth of the matter to really be revealed. And that's how, I had a great interview actually with somebody from Veterans Against the War. Have you guys ever talked to them? Are you members of that organization by chance?
Well, I think Adam Kokish.
IVAW, yeah.
Yeah, IVAW, and I guess VFW is another one that we've, I'm not a member or anything, but, been associated with at various times.
I was gonna say a little bit ago when we were talking about the the perception of the against the war, anti-war is equivalent to anti-soldier, and I think I was going to comment on that basically. What I believe is that there is definitely an agenda that's taken place, and I think that there's been a movement to avoid going in that direction. I think that there's been a movement through media and other social outlets that are available out there, because there was a lesson learned. I think if you look at the essentially the hippie movement. This was a pretty successful actually, gathering and joining of people to kind of team up and say, hey, we're not going to stand for this, And there was a and I believe there was maybe a little bit of a press back in those times to associate that with one another, and it was they had everybody kind of fighting with one another, and I think they really kind of learned their lesson to avoid getting us into that same situation. Now mothers of soldiers who've died overseas are